If you've ever been made to feel small for having a big heart, if you've ever been told you're too much when all you've ever been is yourself, then hit that like button, subscribe, and get comfortable. Because you're about to hear a story that redefines revenge. It's not about loud confrontations or public spectacles. It's about the quiet, devastating power of simply leaving. My name is Claire Whitman. I'm 30 years old. And I didn't realize my relationship was already breaking cleanly, silently, until my fiancé, Mark, looked at me from across our kitchen and said, "You overthink everything." It's exhausting being with someone who actually feels. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even throw the container of pad thai I was still holding in my hands, the noodles already getting cold. Something inside me just powered down. It was a physical sensation, a sudden hollowing out in my chest, like a switch had been flipped and all the lights in the house of my heart had gone dark at once. We had been together for 5 years, engaged for 2 of them. We had a shared apartment in a beautiful old Chicago building with a view of the lake that made our friends jealous on the 4th of July. We had a wedding planned for the following summer at a vineyard in Napa Valley, a place his parents had fallen in love with and decided was the only acceptable backdrop for our nuptials. Save the dates had been mailed months ago, thick cardstock with gold foil lettering. A non-refundable venue deposit had been paid. Bridesmaid dresses in a shade of dusty rose I had spent 3 agonizing weeks perfecting had been ordered. From the outside, we were the couple. The solid, reliable, enviable unit. The one people pointed at and said, "They're going to last." I thought so, too. I really, truly did. That Tuesday night had started badly, the kind of bad that seeps into your bones. My department at work was restructuring. New leadership, a team experience, had rolled out impossible performance metrics designed to do one thing: justify quiet layoffs disguised as strategic realignment. I'd spent the entire day absorbing stress that wasn't technically mine, but somehow always landed on my shoulders, absorbing the anxiety of my colleagues, fielding their panicked questions, and putting on a brave face for a team that was looking to me for stability. I came home carrying the weight of the day and a bag of Thai takeout. His favorite, not mine, hoping, stupidly, for a moment of comfort, for a soft place to land. He was on the couch, exactly where he was every night, scrolling through his phone, the blue light illuminating his face in a way that made his features look harsh, almost unfamiliar. "I think they're setting us up to fail," I said, my voice strained as I set the food down on the coffee table, the plastic containers clattering softly. "The new benchmarks don't account for what we actually do. They're measuring us against industry standards that don't apply to our specialized division. It's a recipe for disaster." He replied, his eyes still glued to the screen, his thumb swiping upward in that endless, hypnotic rhythm of mindless consumption. The sound was so dismissive, so utterly devoid of interest, it felt like a physical blow. "Are you listening?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Yes, Claire. Work is hard. Metrics are unfair. I've heard this before." He said it with the weary tone of a parent who has heard the same excuse from a child 100 times. The dismissiveness stung, sharp and hot. But I tried again, forcing my voice to be softer, more reasonable. "I'm not complaining just to complain. I'm trying to tell you what's happening in my life. My job, the career I've worked so hard for, might be at risk. This is serious." That's when he finally looked up, tearing his eyes away from the glowing rectangle. He didn't look concerned. He didn't look curious. Long day at the office, tired, but annoyed, burdened tired, as if my problems were a tedious interruption to his evening of leisure. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, deliberately, enunciating each word with a chilling precision, "that maybe you overthink everything? That it's exhausting being with someone who actually feels?" The words didn't explode. They didn't shatter. They settled. Heavy, permanent, like dust on furniture that hasn't been moved in years. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe. "It means you turn everything into an emotional event. Work stress, friend drama, even picking out a new coffee maker. Everything is a crisis with you. Everything requires a deep dive, a 5-act play. I share things with you because you're my partner, I said, the hurt beginning to bubble up in my chest, hot and acidic. Well, he said, already looking back down at his phone, his attention already receding, maybe I need someone who doesn't require constant emotional maintenance. That was it. Conversation over. The final word delivered. Like he hadn't just taken my entire inner world, my capacity for joy and sorrow and empathy, and reduced it to a liability, to a burden on his peace. Noted, I said, and I meant it. It wasn't a sarcastic retort. It was a receipt. I was acknowledging the terms of our new, unspoken agreement. From that night on, I stopped sharing. Not dramatically, not obviously. There were no slammed doors or packed suitcases left out in the open. I just withdrew. It was a quiet, methodical process. How was your day? He'd ask without looking up from his laptop. Fine. What are you thinking about? He'd ask during a commercial break. Nothing important. At first, he didn't notice. He was busy. The wedding was in full planning mode. His evenings were consumed by vendor emails and bartender. He talked. I listened. I nodded. I asked the occasional perfunctory question. But I stopped offering myself. I stopped volunteering my thoughts, my fears, my small joys. And the scariest part, the part that made a cold dread settle deep in my bones, was that he didn't miss it. He didn't notice the silence where my voice used to be. He didn't seem to feel the void. That's when I understood something I couldn't unsee. I wasn't too emotional. I was just emotionally alone. And something inside me, a part of me I didn't even know existed, had already started planning a way out long before I was ever willing to admit it to myself. 2 weeks after the night I said noted, my director, a man named David who had always been a mentor to me, asked if I had a few minutes to talk. It was one of those emails that looks casual but never is. The subject line was quick sync, which is universal corporate code for something is about to change, and you need to prepare yourself. I walked into his office with my stomach already tight, the muscles contracting in that familiar way they did when I anticipated bad news. The restructuring rumors had been getting louder, teams merging, roles dissolving, futures being rewritten without warning or consent. We're moving forward with the reorg, he said, his hands folded on the desk in a gesture meant to be reassuring but coming across as defensive. But there's an opportunity one think you should hear about. I waited, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Our parent company is opening a regional office in Singapore. We need someone to lead the setup. Operations, hiring, systems integration, the whole 9 yards. It's a 2-year contract, significant pay increase, and full autonomy. You'd be building the department from the ground up. He paused, watching my face carefully, his eyes kind and perceptive. I think you'd be perfect for it, Claire. The words land like a weight. They landed like a key. They weren't dismissive or minimizing. This was recognition. This was someone seeing my capabilities, my potential, my worth, not as a burden, but as an asset. When would you need an answer? I asked, my mind already racing through possibilities, the gears turning so fast they were almost silent. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Ideally soon, but I know it's a big decision. It took me about 10 seconds. 10 seconds to consider the wedding, the apartment, the life we had so carefully curated. 10 seconds to weigh Mark's comment about my constant emotional maintenance against the chance to be valued for exactly who I was, for the intensity and focus he found so exhausting. 10 seconds to choose myself. I'm interested. The relief on his face surprised me, like he'd been hoping I'd say yes, like he'd been worried I'd let my personal life hold me back. We'd need you there by the end of the quarter, he said. That gives us about 12 weeks. I nodded, my decision solidifying with every passing second. That works. I accepted the offer before I even left his office, signing the letter of intent with a hand that was surprisingly steady. And I didn't tell Mark. Not that night, not the next morning, not the next week. It wasn't spite, not exactly. It was something quieter, more fundamental. I realized suddenly and with brutal clarity that he hadn't asked me anything real about my life in months. Not about the stress at work, not about my career goals, not about whether I was happy, not about whether I was okay. So, I stopped volunteering information about my life. At home, he was deep in wedding mode. His evenings were filled with venue emails and budget spreadsheets that made our love look like a line item. He talked at me about guest counts and menu options, about the difference between champagne and prosecco for the toast. I nodded, asked questions, played land like a weight. They landed like a key. They weren't dismissive or minimizing. This was recognition. This was someone seeing my capabilities, my potential, my worth, not as a burden, but as an asset. When would you need an answer? I asked, my mind already racing through possibilities, the gears turning so fast they were almost silent. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Ideally soon, but I know it's a big decision. It took me about 10 seconds. 10 seconds to consider the wedding, the apartment, the life we had so carefully curated. 10 seconds to weigh Mark's comment about my constant emotional maintenance against the chance to be valued for exactly who I was, for the intensity and focus he found so exhausting. 10 seconds to choose myself. I'm interested. The relief on his face surprised me, like he'd been hoping I'd say yes, like he'd been worried I'd let my personal life hold me back. We'd need you there by the end of the quarter, he said. That gives us about 12 weeks. I nodded, my decision solidifying with every passing second. That works. I accepted the offer before I even left his office, signing the letter of intent with a hand that was surprisingly steady. And I didn't tell Mark. Not that night, not the next morning, not the next week. It wasn't spite, not exactly. It was something quieter, more fundamental. I realized suddenly and with brutal clarity that he hadn't asked me anything real about my life in months. Not about the stress at work, not about my career goals, not about whether I was happy, not about whether I was okay. So, I stopped volunteering information about my life. At home, he was deep in wedding mode. His evenings were filled with venue emails and budget spreadsheets that made our love look like a line item. He talked at me about guest counts and menu options, about the difference between champagne and prosecco for the toast. Filling with searches for Singapore neighborhoods, visa paperwork, and international shipping quotes for my books. He didn't notice. 3 weeks after I accepted the transfer, we went to dinner at his parents' house. It was a weekly ritual, a performance of familial closeness. His mother, a woman who loved the idea of a wedding more than the reality of a marriage, spent the entire meal talking about the details. We need to lock in a band soon, she said, stabbing a piece of chicken with her fork. Prices are going up, and the good ones get booked a year in advance. You can't be indecisive on this. We're thinking live music, Mark added, glancing at me for the first time that evening, a quick, perfunctory check-in. Claire agrees, right? Whatever you prefer, I said, my voice neutral, my expression carefully blank. His father, a quiet man who observed more than he spoke, studied me for a moment over the rim of his glass. You're quiet tonight, Claire. Everything okay? I'm just tired, I replied, offering a practiced, empty smile. It's been a long week. His mother laughed, a bright, brittle sound. Well, don't get too tired. You've got a wedding to plan. This is the fun part. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. It was the first time he'd initiated physical affection in weeks. It felt foreign, like a handshake from a stranger. I squeezed back because everyone was watching. On the drive home, the city lights blurring past the windows, he was unusually talkative. My mom's right, he said. We really need to finalize the venue deposit. They need the final payment by the end of the month. Sure. He glanced at me at a red light, the streetlights catching the first flicker of concern in his eyes. Are you mad at me about something? No. You've been distant. Have I? Yeah, he said, his voice softening. Like you're not really here. I said, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. Isn't that what you wanted? He frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. What are you talking about? You said being with me was exhausting. That I overthink everything. I'm just trying not to be exhausting. Silence. The light turned green, and he accelerated a bit too quickly, the engine of his car complaining. I didn't mean you should shut down completely, he said finally, his voice defensive. I'm not shut down, I replied calmly. I'm just not making everything an emotional event anymore. I'm giving you the quiet, the easy, the low-maintenance partner you asked for. He didn't push it further, but I could tell something had shifted. A seed of doubt had been planted. Good, I thought. Maybe now he'd realize what he'd said. Maybe he'd apologize, maybe he'd try to understand. He didn't. Instead, I started understanding something else. I was planning a future alone while standing right next to him, and for the first time, that future didn't scare me. It felt quiet, intentional, like a room with all the windows thrown open, a chance to finally breathe. 6 weeks before my departure date, I started packing. Not the kind of chaotic packing that leaves open suitcases on the floor and cardboard boxes stacked by the door, a blatant cry for attention. This was quieter than that, strategic, almost surgical. I took a box of books to my office every few days, telling my curious coworkers I was just trying to declutter our shared space. I donated clothes I knew I wouldn't miss, the soft sweaters he liked on me, the dresses I'd bought to fit into a version of myself that had slowly stopped feeling like mine. The truly sentimental things, my grandmother's jewelry, old photo albums, my university diploma. Went into a small, climate-controlled storage unit across town, a unit I paid for in cash on my lunch break. The key, a small, cold piece of metal, I tucked into the side pocket of my work bag, my escape route. The apartment began to feel different, lighter, less me, like a photograph of a place where I used to live. He didn't notice. He was too consumed by wedding planning, his Pinterest boards a mosaic of rustic chic and elegant minimalism, his spreadsheets a complex web of costs and contacts. Every night he sat at the kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face, scrolling through options, asking questions that felt more like checkboxes on a list than genuine curiosity. What do you think of these centerpieces? The eucalyptus and the white roses? They're nice. Just nice? He frowned, his brow furrowed in frustration. You don't care at all, do you? I care about what makes you happy, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said to him in months. That's not the same thing. He was right. It wasn't. Because what made me happy hadn't mattered in a long, long time. I looked at him then, really looked at him, at the man I was supposed to marry. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was frustrated that I wasn't performing the role he expected anymore. I wasn't a partner in his eyes. I was a logistical problem, a difficult variable in his perfectly planned equation. You're right, I said quietly. It's not the same thing. 4 weeks before my flight, I gave notice on our apartment. I called the landlord while sitting in my car during my lunch break, the phone pressed to my ear, my hand steady in a way that surprised even myself. I'll be handling the move-out process, I told him, my voice professional and detached. And if my fiancé calls, please don't mention this conversation to him. There's been a change in my circumstances. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Is everything okay, Ms. Whitman? It will be, I agreed, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. I wanted the ending to be clean. Undeniable. 3 weeks before my departure, my company booked my flight. A Thursday evening departure from O'Hare. I didn't tell his family. I didn't tell our friends. I didn't correct the wedding rumors that were still circulating, the excited questions about our honeymoon plans. I was learning something important, something that felt radical and profound. I didn't know everyone access to my leaving, especially the people who hadn't noticed me fading away right in front of their eyes. 2 weeks out, he planned a guy's trip to a cabin in Michigan for the exact weekend I was supposed to leave. The timing was so perfect it felt like fate. Then it fell apart. One of his friends canceled last minute due to a family emergency, and suddenly the trip was off. He decided to work from home that Friday instead. I adjusted, moving my flight up a day, telling my boss I'd work remotely for my last shift. No problem. Wednesday night, I finished packing. Everything I owned was either in the storage unit in Chicago, in a container slowly making its way across the Pacific Ocean, or in the 2 large suitcases waiting by the door. Thursday morning, he left for the office around 8:30, just like he did every day. He kissed my cheek out of habit, a quick, dry peck. "I'll be home around 6 o'clock, he said. "Want me to grab dinner on my way back?" "I'm good," I replied. "I'll handle it." After he left, I walked through the apartment one last time. It looked staged, neutral, like a model unit for a life I'd never actually lived. I'd left the furniture. It was mostly his anyway, chosen to match his minimalist aesthetic. The dishes, the decorations, the framed photos on the mantel, though I'd carefully removed myself from most of them, leaving the empty frames face down on the coffee table, a silent, final statement. Then I sat at the kitchen counter, the same spot where he had delivered his verdict on my personality, and I wrote the note. I rewrote it 15 times, each draft a little colder, a little cleaner than the last. I didn't want to be cruel, but I refused to be invisible. When I was finally satisfied, I folded the paper once and placed it beside my keys and the engagement ring I'd quietly removed from my nightstand drawer the night before, the diamond catching the morning light in a way that suddenly seemed garish and sad. My Uber arrived at noon. I didn't look back when I locked the door behind me. I didn't need to. I was already gone. I landed in Singapore 16 hours after I locked the door behind me for the last time. I didn't turn my phone on during my layover in Tokyo. I didn't want to watch the explosion in real time, didn't want to feel the vibrations of his frantic calls in my hand. By the time I finally powered it up, it was Saturday afternoon, Singapore time, and I already knew what I'd find. I wasn't wrong. 127 notifications. A blizzard of texts, missed calls, voicemails, and messages from friends I hadn't spoken to in months, all suddenly and desperately invested in my whereabouts. I didn't open anything right away. I unpacked first, methodically putting my clothes away in the dresser of my new, temporary apartment. I took a long, hot shower, letting the steam on the jet lag pull me into a sleep that felt heavier than exhaustion, like my body was finally, after months of tension, unclenching. When I woke up, the Singapore sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink I'd never seen before. I sat on the edge of the bed and started reading. The first messages came Thursday evening, short and confused. "Where are you? This isn't funny. What the hell is this note supposed to mean? Call me right now." Then, as the reality of the situation set in, came the anger. "You're unbelievable. You don't just disappear like this. You're such a coward." Then, the dawning realization. 3 months. You planned this for 3 months. How could you not tell me? Around midnight, his time, the tone shifted again. The messages had turned frantic, laced with the social humiliation he was now facing. "Everyone's asking what happened. Your mom called me crying. I told my parents the wedding is postponed. Please just tell me you're safe." The last message came late Friday night, a single, devastating sentence that showed he'd finally done his homework. "I found your LinkedIn. Singapore. You really left." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my contacts and called my mother. She answered on the first ring. "Claire?" Her voice was tight, thin with worry. "Thank God." He called me crying, saying you vanished. "I didn't vanish," I said gently, my own voice surprisingly steady. "I left. I'm in Singapore." "Singapore?" "I took a job here." "What about the wedding?" "There isn't one." Another pause, this one longer, heavier. Then, her voice softer, full of a mother's pain. "What happened, honey?" I told her the shortened version, the one that left out the months of quiet planning and the secret storage unit. I told her about the comment, the silence that followed, the slow, dawning realization that I was planning a life with someone who didn't actually want to share one, who just wanted someone to manage his logistics. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because everyone loved us together," I admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Because I thought I was the problem. Because I kept hoping that love would eventually sound like effort from both sides." "I'll be okay," I said instead, because it was the only thing I could promise. Monday morning, I started my new job. The office wasn't fully operational yet. Just a handful of us in a sleek, modern building, laying the groundwork, building systems from nothing. "You don't just get to run away from this. We were supposed to get married. I deserve a conversation." 3 weeks after I left, a message came that felt different. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, unvarnished vulnerability. I started therapy. She asked me to write down what I wish I'd done differently. "The list is long. I took you for granted. I made you feel like loving me was a burden. I'm sorry." I stared at that message for a long time, watching the words blur on the screen. Then, for the first time, I typed back. "I appreciate you saying that. I hope therapy helps you. Take care of yourself." That was it. When he immediately asked to talk on the phone, I didn't answer. Some conversations only happen after the damage is done, and I was done standing in the wreckage. A month after I left, Singapore stopped feeling temporary. The city began to feel like something I was inside of, not just passing through. The morning walks past glass towers and street vendors setting up before sunrise, the air thick with the smell of spices and rain. The late nights at the office, building something from nothing, surrounded by people who were smart and driven and passionate. Colleagues who asked how my weekend was and actually waited for the answer. I hadn't realized how rare that had become. He texted less frequently now, no longer daily, usually late at night his time, when the loneliness must have been at its peak. "Do you ever think about me?" I canceled the venue, lost the deposit, but whatever. "Are you happy there?" I ignored most of them. But one night, after a particularly good day, a day where I'd successfully negotiated a complex partnership and felt competent, steady, and whole, I decided to answer the last question. I typed back a single word. "Yes." That was the moment the messages stopped feeling like an attempt to pull me back in and started feeling like closure. 2 months in, my best friend Lauren came to visit. And extended it for a long weekend in Singapore. We sat at a rooftop bar, the city glittering below us like a fallen constellation. "This place suits you," she said, leaning on the railing. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. She hesitated, swirling the ice in her glass. "He asked me if I'd seen you." I figured. "He wanted me to tell you he's sorry again." "I know he's told you." She nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." "I didn't leave to punish him," I said, watching the boats move silently across the dark water. "I left because I couldn't keep shrinking to be easier to love." A few weeks later, I went on my first date since leaving. Nothing dramatic, no fireworks, just coffee with a man from the UK who worked in finance. He was kind, he asked questions, and he didn't make me feel like I was taking up too much space. It was refreshing. The last message from my ex came 4 months after I left. "I'm moving to Denver. Fresh start. I hope Singapore is everything you wanted. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were too much. You weren't. I just didn't know how to show up." I didn't respond, but I appreciated it. It felt like real accountability. Too late to fix us, but enough to let go without bitterness. My mom asked me once if I regretted how I left, the secrecy, the note. Sometimes, I admitted. It was harsh. "But you don't regret leaving?" "No. Because here's what I've learned. Being emotional isn't a flaw. Wanting depth isn't a burden. And love that asks you to dim your light isn't love. It's control disguised as comfort." I didn't lose a fiancé. I reclaimed myself. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like coming home. What Claire's story so powerfully illustrates is that the most profound acts of revenge are often not acts of destruction. Have repeated the words that had once wounded me so deeply. Instead, I leaned forward, gave her my full attention, and said, "Okay. Let's overthink this together. Walk me through every single fear you have. Let's treat every one of them as a valid possibility and figure out a plan for it." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it almost took my breath away. We spent 2 hours that night, not just fixing her model, but building her confidence. I taught her how to channel that anxiety into meticulous, proactive work. I taught her that her sensitivity wasn't a flaw, it was a superpower. As I left the office that night, the Singapore skyline glittering against the inky black sky, I realized I had just given Priya the support I had craved for 5 years. I had become the partner I always needed. And in that moment, any lingering bitterness I felt towards Mark finally dissolved. I didn't need his apology anymore. I had my own. The final piece of closure came, as it often does, when I least expected it. My best friend Lauren and I were on a video call, our time zones barely aligning. We were catching up, laughing about a disastrous date she'd been on, when she paused, her expression on the screen turning serious. "I have to tell you something," she said. "I ran into Mark last week." My stomach tightened, a familiar, reflexive clench. "Oh?" "He was with a woman," she continued gently. "Looked serious." "They were holding hands." I waited, my face a mask of indifference I didn't feel. "He asked about you," Lauren said. "Said he hoped you were happy." "And are you?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "I didn't ask," Lauren replied. "But I don't need to. I see it, Claire. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, I saw them again a few days later, at a coffee shop. He wasn't holding her hand. He was talking to her in that same low, impatient tone I remember so well. Swear to God," he said, "why do you have to be so emotional about everything? It's exhausting." The world seemed to stop. The air left my lungs. It wasn't satisfaction I felt in that moment. It was a strange, sorrowful, earth-shattering validation. It wasn't me. It was never me. I wasn't too much. I wasn't a burden. I was just in love with a man who was emotionally bankrupt, a man who would forever seek out partners with depth and light, only to complain about the shadows they cast. "Wow," I finally managed to say. "Yeah," Lauren whispered. "Wow." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad for him, and for the woman sitting across from him, who was, at that very moment, learning the same brutal lesson I had learned a year ago in a Chicago kitchen. I hoped she would hear the click of the light switching off in her own heart, and I hoped she would have the courage to find her own Singapore. People sometimes ask me if I ever think about what would have happened if I had stayed. If I had tried to talk to him, to go to couples counseling, to fight for the relationship. The truth is, I don't. Not for a second. Because staying would have been a slow, quiet death of the soul. It would have been a lifetime of shrinking, of dimming my own light to make someone else comfortable. Leaving wasn't an act of revenge against him, it was an act of love for myself. The revenge, if you can even call it that, was simply a byproduct of my survival. The cancelled wedding, the lost deposit, the confused and angry phone calls, that wasn't the point. The point was the life I built in the silence he created. The point is the woman I became when I was finally given the space to breathe. My story isn't about how I got back at my ex. It's about how I got myself back. It's about recognizing when love has become a cage and having the courage to walk away, even if it means walking away alone. Being emotional isn't a flaw. Wanting depth isn't a burden. And you should never, ever apologize you take up in this world. The right people won't just tolerate your light, they'll lean in and ask you to tell them all about the fire that makes you glow. I didn't lose a fiancé. I didn't run away from my problems. I chose myself. And for the first time in a long, long time, that feels like everything. Claire's journey doesn't end with her escape, it truly begins there. This final chapter shows us the most satisfying form of karma. Not seeing your enemy fall, but realizing you were never the problem to begin with. Her ex didn't change, he simply repeated his pattern, proving that Claire's departure wasn't an overreaction, but a necessary act of self-preservation. Her story is a powerful testament to the idea that sometimes, the greatest act of love is leaving. It's a reminder that the right partner doesn't just tolerate your emotions, they cherish them. They see your depth not as a burden, but as a gift. Claire didn't just find a new city or a new job, she found herself, and in doing so, she found a freedom more valuable than any wedding ring. It has been 2 years since I left Chicago. 2 years since the life I knew ended and the one I was meant to have began. Singapore is no longer just a city on a map, it's the rhythm of my heartbeat. The scent of rain on hot pavement is my perfume, the melody of a dozen different languages spoken on the MRT is my soundtrack. I'm no longer just the head of the new regional office, I'm a vice president, a title that still feels slightly surreal when I say it out loud. My team is my family, a collection of brilliant, ambitious, and deeply kind people from every corner of the globe. We celebrate Diwali and Lunar New Year with the same fervor we celebrate Christmas. We work hard, we play hard, and we look out for each other. The overthinking that Mark found so exhausting has become my brand. I'm known as the person who can untangle the most complex logistical knots and the most delicate interpersonal conflicts. I don't just manage projects, I manage people's potential. I see their anxieties not as weaknesses, but as data points, as indicators of where they need more support, more guidance, more faith. I have become the partner I always needed, and in doing so, I have built a professional family that cherishes the very things I was once punished for. My personal life is quieter, but no less full. I dated for a while, a series of pleasant, uncomplicated encounters with men who were kind and interesting. But I wasn't looking for a distraction, and I certainly wasn't looking to be saved. I was enjoying my own company, relishing the silence of my apartment, a space filled with my books, my art, my choices. There was no one to tell me my taste in music was too melancholic or that my desire to spend a Saturday reading a book was antisocial. I was free. And in that freedom, I found a contentment so deep it felt like peace. My best friend Lauren, now a regular visitor, commented on it every time she came. "You're not just lighter," she said on her last trip, as we sipped gin slings at the Long Bar at Raffles. "You're anchored. Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She was right. I was anchored. The storm had passed, and I had learned to navigate the open sea on my own. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, a question. The sender's name was one I didn't recognize, Sarah Jenkins. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was spam or a cold call for a business proposition. But something, a flicker of intuition, made me pause. I opened it. The message was short, hesitant, and it made the blood run cold in my veins. It read, "My name is Sarah. I don't know if you'll remember me, but I think we have someone in common. His name is Mark. I found your contact information through an old professional forum you both used to post on. I'm sorry to bother. Manage projects, I manage people's potential. I see their anxieties not as weaknesses, but as data points, as indicators of where they need more support, more guidance, more faith. I have become the partner I always needed, and in doing so, I have built a professional family that cherishes the very things I was once punished for. My personal life is quieter, but no less full. I dated for a while, a series of pleasant, uncomplicated encounters with men who were kind and interesting. But I wasn't looking for a distraction, and I certainly wasn't looking to be saved. I was enjoying my own company, relishing the silence of my apartment, a space filled with my books, my art, my choices. There was no one to tell me my taste in music was too melancholic or that my desire to spend a Saturday reading a book was antisocial. I was free. And in that freedom, I found a contentment so deep it felt like peace. My best friend Lauren, now a regular visitor, commented on it every time she came. "You're not just lighter," she said on her last trip, as we sipped gin slings at the Long Bar at Raffles. "You're anchored. Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She was right. I was anchored. The storm had passed, and I had learned to navigate the open sea on my own. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, a question. The sender's name was one I didn't recognize, Sarah Jenkins. My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was spam or a cold call for a business proposition. But something, a flicker of intuition, made me pause. I opened it. The message was short, hesitant, and it made the blood run cold in my veins. It read, "My name is Sarah. I don't know if you'll remember me, but I think we have someone in common. His name is Mark. I found your contact information through an old professional forum you both used to post on. I'm sorry to bother you. I need to know if it's true. I think it is. I hope you're well." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Mark. Of course. It had been over a year since Lauren had seen him with the crying woman. A year since I'd received the final, cathartic validation that I wasn't the problem. I had assumed that was the end of it, the final scene in a drama I had long since left the stage. But here it was, a ghost from a past life, reaching out through the ether. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen responses fought for dominance. Anger, "Leave me alone." Pity, "Run." Fear, "What do you want from me?" But the one that truly represented the woman I had become, was simple and calm. I wrote back, "Hello Sarah. I do remember the name. Yes, I am well. I'm sorry you're going through whatever it is you're going through. What do you need to know?" What followed was a correspondence that would change me in ways I'm still processing. Over the course of several weeks, Sarah and I exchanged a series of emails. At first, they were cautious, her messages filled with the kind of justifications and excuses I knew all too well. "He's just stressed," she'd write. "He doesn't mean it. He's a good person, really." I didn't argue. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I just listened. I mirrored back to her the empathy I had once craved. I shared with her, not the dramatic details of my escape, but the quiet, daily reality of what it felt like. I described the slow erosion of my confidence, the way I started second-guessing my own memories, the feeling of walking on eggshells in my own home. I told her about the overthinking comment, the words that had been my final, breaking point. Her reply to that email was a single, devastating sentence, "He says that to me, too." That was the turning point. The dam broke. She sent me a torrent of messages, a flood of pain and rolled his eyes when she got emotional during a movie. The way he'd call her dramatic when she tried to express her needs. The way he made her feel like her entire emotional landscape was a burden he was forced to carry. I didn't give her advice. I didn't tell her to leave him. I just bore witness to her pain. I validated her feelings. I told her, over and over, "You are not too much. You are not a burden. Your feelings are valid." I became the anchor for her that I had learned to be for myself. I was giving her the map I had drawn for myself out of the darkness. The final email from her came 3 months after our first contact. It was short and it was powerful. "I left," it said. "I packed a bag while he was at work and I went to my sister's. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. But when I read your emails, I saw a future. I saw that it was possible to be happy without him. I saw that the problem wasn't me. You saved me, Claire. You didn't even know you were doing it, but you did. Thank you for giving me the courage to find my own Singapore." I read that email and I wept. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of profound, bone-deep release. My escape, my painful, necessary, life-altering decision, had not just saved me. It had created a life raft for someone else I would never meet. The revenge I had sought wasn't against Mark. It was against the silence, the isolation, the lie that we are alone in our pain. And in that moment, I knew I had one. A week later, I got one last message. It was from Mark. Sarah must have told him she'd been in contact with me. His message was a pathetic, rambling mess of accusations and pleas. "How could you interfere?" he wrote. "You ruined everything. You turned her against me." I read it once, felt a flicker of the old familiar anger, and then it was gone, replaced by a calm, clear indifference. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message, blocked his number, and closed my laptop. I walked out onto my balcony, the warm, humid air a familiar embrace. I looked out at the city skyline, a testament to resilience, to constant change, to building something new and beautiful on the foundations of the past. I thought about Sarah, starting her own new life, finding her own feet. I thought about Priya, now a teen lead, mentoring her own analysts. I thought about the woman I was, and the woman I had become. My story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. It was about the ripples we create when we choose to save ourselves. I didn't just reclaim my own life. I had, in some small way, helped someone else reclaim hers. And that, I realized, was a love story more powerful and more meaningful than any wedding I had ever planned. This is where the story of revenge transcends itself and becomes a story of legacy. Claire's journey, which began with a single, devastating act of self-preservation, has come full circle. The ultimate payoff wasn't seeing her ex suffer, it was the profound, unexpected connection she made with the woman who came after her. Her revenge became a rescue mission, not one she planned, but one that happened organically when she chose to live her truth out loud. This final chapter shows us that the most powerful thing we can do after healing is to extend a hand to someone else who is still in the dark. It proves that our stories have power, that sharing our pain can light the way for you for going on this entire journey with Claire. Her story is over, but the impact of it, like the ripples in a pond, is just beginning. Until next time, be kind, be brave, and never underestimate the power of your own story.